I was sent on a medical evacuation or a medevac on a small plane, a twin engine plane called a Piper Aztec. This plane flew into bad weather, so one engine stopped and then the other engine stopped of the twin propeller plane. If you go into the trees, that you're a goner. We would have been okay if the ice was thick enough, but it wasn't. As soon as the plane came to a stop, the ice very quickly broke and the plane nosedived and sunk down into very deep water. This force field of peace starts descending upon me, and it's literally pushing down all of my fear.
Good evening and welcome to Earth to the Other Side. My name is John, I'm your host, and tonight my guest is Dr. Yvonne Cason, who's had multiple near-death experiences as well as spiritually transformative experiences, a phrase which she has actually coined, and she's also the founder of an organization called Spiritual Awakenings International, and she's written several books, two of which, the latest, are Touched by the Light and Soul Lessons from the Light. Dr. Yvonne Cason, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, John.
Wonderful, wonderful. So I guess we'll start from the beginning. That's tends to be the best place. I'll just let you jump right into your experience. How about that?
All righty. Well, I guess a good place to start is in my childhood, because I didn't realize it when I was a kid, but I realize it now as an adult looking back, that actually I started having spiritually transformative experiences when I was a child. But I didn't know that when I was a kid, because as a child, you don't have any like measuring stick. This is normal. This is paranormal. Everything's just stuff that happens to you, right? So, but now looking back, I have realized I had two near-death experiences as a child. So the first one happened to me when I was 5 years old, and I was traveling in Europe with my parents. My grandparents lived in Switzerland, and we were at a train station in Switzerland. They travel by train all the time. I was 5 years old, and this was all fascinating and new to me because, I was born and raised in Toronto, and in Toronto at that time, we didn't travel by train. They didn't have streetcars yet then, and subways or anything. So this was exciting for me, standing on a train platform in a train station in Europe. And I had this brilliant idea to jump down onto the railway tracks and climb up on the next platform. So I had seen a station hand do that. So I leaned forward and I was beginning my jump onto the railway tracks. And then all of a sudden, it was like my life was a motion picture and somebody pressed the pause button, because it was like time stood still. And there I was at a 45-degree angle, frozen in space. And then what was interesting is my point of perception, or now I'd call it my consciousness, left my body. And suddenly I was like 20 or 25 feet above my body looking down. It was like my consciousness was still moving forward, but the movie of my life had frozen. Someone had hit the pause button. And so I could look down and I saw myself, in the middle of a jump. And from up there, from 20 feet up or so, I could see looking forward what I had not seen when I was, jumping down on the tracks, was that there was a train coming into the station just then, really quickly coming into the station. And I was jumping in front of an oncoming train, and I was about to be hit by a train. And I remember it was very unusual because I felt so completely peaceful and completely unafraid and unusually calm, because you would think, as a little kid realizing you're about to be hit by a train, but no, it was, there was like this strange calm at the same time. And I remember very clearly thinking, oh, I see. I'm about to be hit by a train. And I knew that meant I was going to be killed, but I was not afraid for some reason. Then all of a sudden, it was like somebody released the pause button and the movie of my life started going forward again. And a gentleman on the train platform reached forward, grabbed my little body and pulled me back onto the train platform so that I was not hit by the train. And with a whisk of air, the train passed in front of me as it came into the station. And my parents, of course, started scolding me immediately. So I basically didn't talk about it afterwards because I didn't want to bring up the scolding. But as I look back now, I realize that that was an out of body experience when I was close to death. And it had the after effect as the same as other people who've had out of body type of near death experiences, because it made me open to out of body experiences. I started having out of body experiences as a kid. And I remember, flying down my street, etc. But as a little kid, I didn't know it was an out of body experience. I didn't know it was out of the ordinary. How I understood it as a 5-year-old was I thought I could fly. Like I couldn't distinguish between what was happening when I was awake or in a paranormal state. So I thought I could fly, that I thought I was able to fly down my street. And so much so that when I started kindergarten that September, I remember so clearly when I made a new little friend in kindergarten, because at that time we started kindergarten at the age of 5. I met a little friend and I says, guess what? I could fly. And I remember he laughed at me and said, no, you can't. And I said, sure, I'll show you. And my house was just down the street from the school. So I said, come on over to my house. And I climbed up the fence and I spread out my arms and I jumped off the fence, planning to show him how I'm able to fly down the street. And, of course, like I fell to the ground and my friend laughed at me and went home. But I still remember to this day, I was puzzled. Like I couldn't figure it out. Like, how come in my mind I have such clear memory of flying down the street and I wasn't able to do it? But I now realize many years later that that was an after effect of my first near-death experience, which was an out-of-body type of near-death experience. It made me start being open in my consciousness to having more out-of-body experiences. My next near-death experience happened when I was 11. I had just turned 11. My family was involved in a really major car accident, and where the car went off a deep incline from the highway down a ditch, rolled a few times. And in the process of this accident, this was before the day of seatbelts, and it was a station wagon, a family station wagon. I was in the back seat, and we had the whole rear compartment full of suitcases. Evidently, I had been thrown back with the accident into the luggage area, and that I had some sort of a head injury when the car went down into the ditch, and I was unconscious. And my parents told me that I was unconscious for about 3 days following this car accident. So what is interesting is what I remember about the car accident, because I actually don't remember the accident. What I do remember, and I've always had clear memory for, was floating above the accident. So what my point of perception was floating above the accident when I was unconscious in the luggage compartment, little kid unconscious in the back. And again, as I've said before, as an 11-year-old, I had no idea this was unusual or paranormal. I thought this is what happened to everybody if they were unconscious in a car accident. I didn't know any better. So I've always had memory of it, and I never talked about it or anything, because I thought this was just what happens to people. Anyway, I have clear memory of floating above the accident scene and seeing my father. He'd been quite seriously injured. He had blood dripping through his face. He had bad scalp injuries. And I remember watching from above and hearing him as he was calling out, my daughter, because he had looked around and he had seen that they hadn't found my body. Right? Because I was hidden in the crushed car between the suitcases in the back. And my dad later confirmed for me that, yes, this is exactly what happened. That, even though he was so injured, they hadn't found me. So he kept going, my daughter. And he said he could finally relax when somebody finally found me. Hey, there's someone in here. And they brought me up to the side of the road, and he knew they had found me. So I've always remembered that, which was confirmed by my father. And then it's like my memory jumps of the accident scene. So the next memory I still have it, and I've always had it, is now I'm floating above my body after they had brought us to the closest emergency department. An ambulance had come, and I was looking from the top, looking down again about 20 feet above, and I could see my little body lying on an examining table in the emergency department, and I can still see the little outfit I was wearing and everything. And I saw these two men sort of huddled, in hospital gear over my body. I assumed they were doctors trying to resuscitate me or something. And then I saw from a top-down perspective, I saw this big round dome-shaped lamp, but I was looking at it from the top down over this examining table. And as a kid, I had no idea what operating room or emergency room lamps looked like. But later on, as I trained as a doctor and I went into hospitals and emergency rooms, etc., I went, oh yeah, that's exactly what I saw from a top-down perspective when I now know I was out of body during this near-death experience when I was unconscious. And then my memory seemed to jump through time. And then the next piece that I remember very clearly was the moment that I woke up and found myself in a pediatric hospital ward with the railings pulled up, etc. So it was like a skipping stone in time, the pieces of my memory for that near-death experience. It made me open to mediumistic experiences. And I remember telling my parents I refused to sleep I was old enough to be in my own bedroom, but I refused to sleep in my own bedroom. I made them push my bed into the bedroom with my younger brother and sister, and I felt safer with them in the same room as I was seeing like these wispy spirits at night is when I would see them the most. And as a kid, I thought our house was haunted. We had just moved and I thought we'd moved into a haunted house and that for some reason, who knows what, I was the only one who was seeing the ghosts. So looking back, I now realize that is when my own personal spiritual awakening journey started. It actually started in my childhood. And maybe that is what began to open the doors of my consciousness so that I ended up, as my life progressed, as you mentioned, I've now had multiple near-death experiences, a total of 5, and multiple types of spiritually transformative experiences.
It's incredible. I'm so the hair is raising on my arms right now because not that I want to jump away from your experience, but it's so similar to experiences that I had as a kid as well, which I've never really talked about, but I guess I'll talk about it now. But just the whole out of body thing, the first time that happened to me, I was in grade 1, so I must have been 6 years old, right?
Mm-hmm.
Grade 1, yeah.
Yeah.
And I'd fallen on the ice, and just literally right before my head hit the pavement, I was chasing a friend who grabbed my hat and whatever, I was trying to get my hat back. And right before I hit the pavement, all of a sudden I'm way up in the air. And everything.
That's exactly what happened to me. Mm-hmm.
I know. That's why when you were telling me this, it's I've heard similar stories, but the way you told it was just like me.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I know
I'm telling you, I'm an expert. It is that you had a childhood near-death experience. That's what that is.
And I saw, and what happened with me was immediately, like what you said, I felt this feeling of, wow, this is really cozy. I felt like I was in a cloud of love, it just felt really cozy. But I also, and tell me if this happened to you. I also kind of remember this feeling like I was an adult. I didn't feel like the 6-year-old child that was somewhere. By the way, I didn't even know which one was me. And I heard this voice say, take a look around. Mm-hmm. So I'm looking around and I see a group of people hovering over something. And because I didn't remember much about falling or anything like that. And then he just says, so tell me what you see. And I said, and then as that happened, I don't know if I saw through the people or if they moved, but suddenly I saw this kid on the ground. And I'm like, oh, is this the one? And then I'm thinking, yeah, that's me. Now I'm piecing it together. Did you have anything like that? Like that kind of, it's so hard to do.
Well, first off, let me just say, John, thank you for sharing. And I think it's divine design that you shared it today with an NDE and STE expert so that I can say, yes, that was a childhood near-death experience. Very, very, very definitely. And, that would explain why your consciousness is opened up and you've been having STEs of many kinds, as you told me earlier on. The same as it did with me. I think the similarities are remarkable. I mean, that's why I led with that statement, because that's what I discovered for me. And I mean, for heaven's sakes, I'm a near-death researcher and STE researcher and have been for 40 years, but I didn't figure out till this is honest to God truth. It was about 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago, that I finally figured out that these childhood experiences were near-death experiences. Because as a child, you just don't label it as paranormal. It's just what happened to you. Whereas when you're an adult, you have a much clearer sense of, oh, something unusual just happened to me.
Yeah, sure.
So don't feel bad that it's taken you a while to figure that out. In fact, I find that's really common with childhood near-death experiencers, that they hear me talk and then they go, oh my goodness, I think I've had one too.
Right? Yeah.
And my experience, and I'm going to go on to what happened to me in my 20s. I have found that this is true for most people, that it takes them a long time, and usually it's years. And it can be many years, 10, 20, 30, even 40 years to figure out, oh, there's a name for that, and this is what it is, and other people are having it. And in the meanwhile, it's like it's there somewhere in your memory, and you're like, oh, who knows, whatever. It's just one of those random things that happened to me in life. Well, this sort of pattern continued for me. I mean, I had a few things that I would just let's call them psychic or intuitive experiences of various kinds when I was a teenager, but not like really big ones that stand out like these two near-death experiences when I was a kid. But when I was in my early 20s, I went to medical school quite young. And so I was in medical school and I was in my last year. I was 23 years old. I went to McMaster University in Hamilton. And they had a course on campus on meditation that was being offered. And they said that if you meditated, it would help you do better on your exams and you could study better and blah, blah, blah. So I thought, yeah, I want to do well on my medical school exam. So I took this meditation course. And I'm just saying this because I was not trying to have some sort of experience. I was using it to try and study better. And actually, it did help me, and I did very well in my exams. But as we now know, meditation is a very strong trigger to all sorts of spiritually transformative experiences. And what happened to me in December of that year, the year I was 23, I was meditating. I'd been meditating regularly now for about 3 months. And an interesting thing, too, that when I learned how to meditate, it felt like a duck being introduced to water. It was like, oh, this feels good. This feels right. I just took to it right away. I loved it. I now realize that that's from past lives, that I've been a meditator in many, many past lives. So it was being reintroduced to something that I was very familiar with and had loved in many past lives. So I hope that's okay to say that on your channel, but I'm assuming that it is. And so, So I was meditating every morning, every evening, 45 minutes to an hour. Found it really, really helped me. Then all of a sudden, this one evening, it was actually in a group meditation, the group that I'd learned the meditation technique from. And they had taught this technique, which I think they really didn't know what it was doing, where you were supposed to visualize white light rising up your spine, and then you're supposed to visualize this full-blown lotus at the top of your head. So, okay, I was doing that. I was visualizing light rising up my spine and this full-blown lotus to the top of my head, little blossoming lotus. And all of a sudden, I heard this loud inner roaring noise, like the roar of a waterfall. I don't know how to convey that noise well over Zoom, but the loud, loud roar like Niagara Falls, a loud inner roaring sound. And at the same time as I heard that inner loud roaring sound, I felt this really strong energy rise up it wasn't just my spine, it was like my entire body and spine. And it rose up my body and spine up to the top of my head, and then whoop, so it got to the top of my head, I popped out of body again. And this time I expanded, like what I sense as me and my other out-of-body experiences. Like there's really no sense of size, but I sort of felt like my own size, right? Whereas this one, there was this powerful sense of expansion, like that I'd become really huge, like I'd become like this huge force field that was as big as the auditorium that I was sitting in. But not only that, not only did I feel that I had expanded to this really big size, but it was like I became transformed into a force field of love. It was like I became love itself. And like I now, going back, realize that what happened to me that day was that I had a Kundalini awakening associated with my first mystical experience this lifetime. But I didn't know that. I mean, I was 23. What did I know? And I thought this was like, I finally did my technique correctly. And I was having like the it experience that people are supposed to have every time they meditate. And I was actually embarrassed to tell people afterwards, because, here was I, this A student. It took me this long to get my meditation technique right. And so that was how I misunderstood what had happened to me. I stayed in this expanded state of consciousness and feeling that profound love, maybe for about an hour, until my meditation ended. And then when my meditation ended, I just sort of contracted back into myself. Well, I could not replicate that experience when I meditated on other occasions. And again, I thought it was because I was doing something wrong in my meditation technique. So rather embarrassedly, I went up to the meditation group leader, maybe a couple weeks later, and said, can you tell me what I'm doing wrong? Because I'm not able to have, that experience when I meditate. And I remember when I told them what I'd experienced, how their jaws dropped. That happened to you? And I went, yes. And I said, what is it? That was my first clue that it wasn't happening to everybody all the time, that I wasn't like a failure in that class. And so they said to me, well, the only thing we've heard of that sounds a bit like would be a Kundalini awakening, but couldn't possibly be a Kundalini awakening. You're much too young, like I was 23, that you have to be meditating with a guru in the Himalayas and get Shakti Put and all this sort of stuff to have that sort of experience. So we don't know what it is. So I didn't know what it was, but I now know it was a Kundalini awakening. And I had lots of after effects from that Kundalini awakening, which I now realize are normal after effects if you've had a Kundalini awakening, because it's a beginning, it's a starting of a long-term spiritual awakening process. And it opens your consciousness so that you start having more types of spiritually transformative experiences. So that happened to me. I found myself getting more intuitive, getting more clairsentient, getting more clairvoyant. I was having repeated sensations of the energy rising up my spine. And these weren't random. Like, it wasn't just random when I would get the rushes of energy up my spine. I learned that they seem to have an inner wisdom, like a cosmic wisdom to them. Like if somebody was saying something that was true and that was important for me to listen to, I'd get a rush of energy up my spine. Or if I'm thinking, should I do this? Should I do X? And if I should, I get a rush of energy up my spine. Okay, got it. I'm supposed to do that. And if I'm thinking of doing something and it's not right for me, I wouldn't get that rush. Instead, I'd get like a sick feeling in the pit of my stomach going, oh, okay, I'm not supposed to do that. And so it was like this process was happening, that some higher force or an energy was it's like it was training me and guiding me, in my process as it developed. Anyway, I didn't have time. And the chakra sensations, that's the other two more things. Chakra sensations and inner sounds. After that started the Kundalini awakening, I started also, in addition to these energy rushes, having clear experiences where I could feel where the chakras were. Like I'd heard of them, but they weren't like anything real to me. But now I was actually experiencing them in my body, that I could feel like energy flows or energy vibrations, or even perceive colors sometimes, with my various chakras. Particularly my heart chakra was one that I was getting a lot of energy sensations, and sometimes here in my third eye chakra. And then the other thing that I was getting was inner sounds. And I remember being so puzzled with one of the inner sounds I got early on sounded a bit like trucks rumbling down the street. Another one of the early sounds I got sounded a bit like crickets. And so I remember I'd like, are there trucks out at 3 a.m? I'd look at my street because I was hearing this inner rumbling sound. Or, at one point I thought, I must have an infestation of crickets in my house. Why am I always waking up in the middle of the night and hearing crickets? Because waking at 3 a.m. is another thing that happens after Kundalini awakening. But I now know these are inner sounds of the chakras as the chakras are being awakened and activated. So I was getting all sorts of unusual things happening to me, but it's taken me years to figure out that was all related to this Kundalini awakening.
Can I interject with a real quick question?
Sure.
I'm just curious because I love the way you describe the inner. Did you feel a vibration as well in your ear?
Yes.
Somewhere inside? Yeah.
Oh, lots. I could go on and on. Vibrations. It could be in my ear. It could be in my body.
But did it feel like it was almost like a few, like maybe 15 feet away, but at the same time you could feel the same? Like what I'm trying to describe is, let's say you hear something 20 feet away, but the thumping vibration is in sync with what you're hearing.
I've had all sorts of inner sounds. That might have been one along the way, but the ones I really remember clearly are the crickets, because I thought, what do I have to do? Get an exterminator? And like, there are no crickets in my house. I was hearing the sound that is the inner sound of crickets. And that rumbling sound like a truck on the road, like that's been very, very extensively described now relating to the heart chakra. In the center of my head sometimes, like the center of my head is rumbling and vibrating. It's like, but these are all symptoms after Kundalini awakening associated with chakra awakenings. I now realize that. Now I was at the University of Toronto finishing my residency, and I was assigned in the last year of my residency, I was 26, to Sioux Lookout, which is a community in northern Ontario, pretty remote, that deals with native Indian communities in remote places in northern Ontario. And on this day, March 27th, 1979, I was sent on a medical evacuation, or a medevac, on a small plane, a twin engine plane called a Piper Aztec. And this plane flew into bad weather in winter, which we in Canada know about bad weather in winter. The first one engine, they think it's the air filters froze over, so one engine stopped, and then the other engine stopped of the twin propeller plane. The pilot really, really heroically wrestled with it, trying to do like a guided belly landing on the surface of a frozen lake rather than crashing into the trees, because it's all northern Ontario. It's like northern Quebec. It's all forested and lakes. If you go into the trees, you're a goner. So he was trying to get us guided crash belly landing on the ice. And we actually heroically, thank you, Jerry was our pilot. He got us down in the ice, and we would have been okay. And the plane's on its belly skidding across the ice. We would have been okay if the ice was thick enough, but it wasn't. And what happened is, as soon as the plane came to a stop, the ice very quickly broke, and the plane nosedived and sunk down into very deep water. And where we had crashed was a place called Lake of the Woods, which is close to Kenora. And the particular spot is called Devil's Gap. That's like, it's really its name. And it's called Devil's Gap because of the strong current. And the ice never freezes over there, and it's treacherous in the summer and in the winter. And we had to very, very quickly get out of the plane as the plane was sinking. And the pilot, the nurse, and I managed to get out. We tried to get the patient out. We were unable to. She unfortunately went down with the plane and perished. And then I had to swim a very long distance to the closest shore through a strong current of Devil's Gap. This is sub-zero weather in winter. I'm wearing a heavy winter parka, heavy winter clothes, winter boots. They're pulling me down like lead weights into the water. They say it was about 200 yards I had to swim. It was a miracle I was even able to swim that distance. Through the grace of God at that age, you know how God prepares us for things in advance and we don't even realize it, God or spirit, whatever we want to call it. my favorite exercise routine was swimming laps at the pool. So I was an incredibly strong swimmer, which came very much in handy after the plane crash. So anyway, but I had my first adult near-death experience during this plane crash. It started before the plane crashed. It started when the plane was going down. So if you've ever been in a propeller plane, you know they're really loud and really noisy. You can hear the engines, right? And this was such a small plane. I was only like 10 feet from either engine. So when the one engine stopped, I noticed right away. I looked up from my patient and because the noise had gone away and you could see the propeller stopping. And then when the other propeller engine stopped, again, the noise went away and I could see it stopping. And you don't have to be an Einstein to realize you're in a plane, you have no engines going. This is not good, right? And my immediate reaction, we're going down, and it was like we were in a storm and it was being buffeted and the pilot's trying to steer the plane. And it was really clear we were crashing. And my immediate reaction, like a reflex, was intense fear and panic. And it just was like a reflex. It came out of my heart. This thought, oh God, help, I'm going to die. And I think that was close enough to a prayer that this is when spirit responded and my near-death experience began. All of a sudden, we're still going down. The plane hasn't crashed yet. This force field of peace starts descending upon me, and it's literally pushing down all of my fear. And I start feeling that incredible, complete calm, complete peace. I was no longer afraid. And I heard an inner voice, a clear inner voice. And before that time, I'd never heard inner voices. And it had a masculine tone, this inner voice. And the voice said, "Be still and know that I am God. I am with you now and always." And with those words came this just profound spiritual vibration. And so I remained in this sort of state of, I don't know what to call it, peace, feeling the presence of God. As the plane finally, we avoided the trees, we had the belly landing, then the nosedive, and then I'm in the water. And the pilot started shouting, "Try to swim to shore, try to swim to shore." I'm sorry, he started saying, "Try to get on the ice, try to get on the ice," getting my story mixed up. The voice in my head, on the other hand, now started talking to me again and said, "Swim to shore." And I remember I was inexperienced in intuitive experiences and higher guidance. What I did is I started mentally arguing with the voice. I went, "No, I took lifeguarding. They tell you if you have a boating accident, don't swim to shore. You'll drown. You swim to shore. No, I'm going to try and get on the ice." And so, I'm embarrassed, but that's truly what happened. Hopefully, at this point in my life, I have learned the importance of listening to our higher guidance. But anyway, so I didn't listen to my inner voice. Instead, I tried to get on the ice, but the ice was too thin and I was getting more and more tired. The voice repeats, "Swim to shore." Finally, the third time the voice said, "Swim to shore," I finally listened. I surrendered. Thank God I finally did, because that's what saved my life. And I started swimming to shore. Now, it was a really long and a really difficult swim, and I went under several times, got lake water in my lungs, kicked with all of my strength to get my mouth above surface again, and then would stroke by stroke keep swimming. So somewhere in the process of swimming to shore is when my near-death experience deepened. And what happened was I once again heard that loud roaring noise, the same as I heard in my Kundalini awakening. And I felt myself lifted out of my body the same time as I heard that noise. And I found myself, there I was, 20 or 30 feet above my body. But what was interesting this time was that my consciousness seemed to be two places at the same time, because my body down there was still very actively trying to swim to shore, desperately trying to swim to shore. So I sort of compare it to a split screen TV where my consciousness was two places at the same time. And the little image on the split screen TV, a little bit of my consciousness was still in my physical body that was desperately trying to swim to shore. Most of my consciousness was now above my body. And then the majority of my consciousness rose even higher. And I went into this place or state or realm, it's hard to have the words to describe it, that was filled with light and filled with love. So it was a dark and stormy day outside for my physical body. But for the rest of my consciousness, where I had gone to was filled with this soft, glistening, beautiful light, like what you see at the top of clouds as a plane is going up and about to break up into the bright sunlight above. You see that glistening white all around you. This is what it was like visually for me on the other side in the white light realm. For a few moments, I did see sort of a face of light, and then it sort of faded into like the cloud-like periphery. But the most powerful aspect was the love that I was feeling. I was feeling the most powerful, unconditional, pure, total love that I had ever felt. My Kundalini related experience on a scale of 1 to 10 would make that a 2, and this was a 10. I just felt such complete love. And I knew things. It's not like a voice explained it to me or anything. It's just somehow I knew things when I was in this realm of love and light. I absolutely knew beyond a doubt. It's like my soul knew, or my soul recognized, or it was transmitted to me. I don't know. I just knew. I knew that love that I was feeling was the love of our higher power, or what I had been raised to call God. And what I was experiencing God to be was not at all like what I had been taught. It was not an old man with a long white beard sitting on a throne, judging me if you've been good, if you've been bad. That was not what I was actually experiencing at all. What I was actually experiencing God, or the higher power, whatever word you want to use, to be, was this like an infinite force that is infinitely intelligent and underlying, creating, sustaining, all at the same time, all of creation, past, present, future. And it is incredibly loving, loves everyone and everything unconditionally. Doesn't matter what religion we are, what color we are, no religion, no color, none of that matters. It's like we're all loved. It's like we're all like children of the same one loving, intelligent force, and all of the children are equally loved. So I also knew, without it being explained to me, somehow I also knew that what I think of as me, Yvonne, this incarnation, would live on, whether or not my body down there survived this accident, whether or not I was able to swim to shore. And it really didn't matter to me whether the body made it to shore or not, because I was home. I was where I belonged. This was it. This is the it experience that we all want. And so I sort of watched curiously just to see how the story ended, to see whether or not the body would make it to shore. Well, through a whole bunch of coincidences, if you believe in coincidences and miracles, but I think it's all divine plan. I was meant to live. I was able to make it to shore. I go into a lot of details. I mentioned my books. This is my new memoir book, Soul Lessons from the Light. Just came out 6 months ago. But so I go all the details in my book, but I'll just say basically a whole series of miracles and coincidences. I was able to make it to shore, and there just happened to be a helicopter nearby, which is the only vehicle that could have possibly rescued us from where we swam to. And, there just happened to be an Air Canada plane overhead that picked up our Mayday call. Nobody else could have picked it up, just happened to relay it down. Anyway, all these things, the pilot, the helicopter pilot, without thinking about risking his life, he'd met another person grounded by the storm. They didn't even know each other. They just like reflex, got in the helicopter, searched for us, found us, brought us to the closest hospital, which was Kenora Hospital. I remember watching from above as they landed the helicopter on the hospital driveway, and the emergency staff came out with their little gurneys. They put me on a gurney, wheeled me into the hospital, and my consciousness only re-entered my body after they resuscitated or revived me, because I was hypothermic, that means almost frozen to death, and a near drowning victim when I was brought into the hospital. And what they did is they put our bodies into the hot whirlpool baths, the physiotherapy department, to rewarm us, which is exactly what we needed, because it was in there when my body was being reheated in that hot water that all of a sudden I felt my consciousness re-enter my body. And what that felt like was exactly how they depict on TV and movies about a genie being sucked into a bottle. It's like all of a sudden I was like sucked in through the top of my head from this big expanded place up above, sucked down, and there was that noise too, into the small confines of my body, which was like the genie in the bottle. And it's like, oh, I'm back. I'm going to live. I'm going to live. So that was my first adult near-death experience. And that was profoundly impactful, spiritually impactful. And once again, I tried to find names for this, because after it happened to me, I didn't even have words. Like, what was this that I didn't have words to describe it? And I remember I was off work for about a month because of my frostbite and other injuries. So when I went back to work, I was talking with some of the doctors, and everyone was real interested to hear about what happened in the plane crash. And I told everyone about this experience. And I remember asking my doctor colleagues, has anyone ever heard of anything like this? I don't even have a name to call what happened to me. And I remember my doctor colleagues and supervisors and friends, they all knew I was like not a crazy person. So they all came up with a hallucination theory, right? That, it was a hallucination brought on by an electrolyte imbalance, or it was a hallucination brought on by a low blood sugar. And I thought, no, that just did not resonate for me, because it was so profoundly, positively impactful. And the memory of it was just absolutely etched in my heart and soul and memory. And hallucinations are not like that. And finally, I found one of my medical colleagues who is a devout Christian. He listened to my story, and he said to me, Yvonne, I think you've had a mystical experience. And so suddenly, ding, 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 finally, there was a word that fit for what happened to me. So for many, many years, I called what happened to me, which I now realize it was a near-death experience, I called it my mystical experience that happened in the plane crash. And in truth, a near-death experience is a mystical or out-of-body experience that happens to happen to you when you're close to death. But as you and I both know, people can have mystical and out-of-body experiences also when they're not near death.
Wow, this is such a beautiful story, such a beautiful experience. It's incredible. Did you also speak to just friends and family outside of your colleagues when this happened to you, the mystical experience realization?
I tried to. I actually, somebody in the city of Toronto at that time said that they'd had a near-death experience. So I went and spoke to this person just to see if they thought this might have been a near-death experience. And I remember so clearly what this person said to me. They said, well, did you see a tunnel with a white light at the end of it? And I went, no. And then he said, and were you clinically dead? And I thought, I don't think so. I think maybe I was unconscious, but I was never actually dead. And so then he said to me, then it was not a near-death experience. Don't know what it was, but it was not a near-death experience. So what this prompted me to do, John, because I just was not finding explanations. And I started like living a double life. I was in the closet. I was an in the closet mystic and spiritual seeker. So there's the outer part of me. I finished my residency and I got a teaching position and I had a very successful medical practice, blah, blah, blah. But there's my in the closet part that nobody else knew about because it was not safe to talk about it. I was researching and reading everything I could about mystical experiences, like from various spiritual traditions. In psychology, as medicine, has anyone written about it? In fact, there have been people who've written about it. Richard Maurice Buck, a famous Canadian psychiatrist, has written about mystical experiences, and Carl Jung has written about mystical experiences. I mean, there were medical people. Yeah. There are lots of people that I was reading, and in mystical traditions, many backgrounds. And I was reading about Kundalini because I'd been told that it was not a Kundalini awakening, but I concluded later with time, yes, it was. I read about near-death experience because I was told it was not a near-death experience, and later on I concluded, yes, it was. I read about mystical experiences. I read about out-of-body experiences. I read about psychic experiences. So I was researching all these things, but it was like I was leading a double life. Plus I was meditating, having all sorts of STEs. But I was in the closet for almost 12 years. And, but something interesting happened during those 12 years is that people started finding me, people who were having different types of STEs, spiritually transformative experiences, somehow heard via the grapevine, oh, there's this doctor in Toronto that you can go and see, and she's had an experience herself. So people started coming to see me in my practice and telling me about their experiences too. And so I was also getting that, that I'd now heard a lot of people's stories, and I was really horrified at how badly people were being treated, that people who were having these sorts of spiritually transformative experiences, which is a term I later coined, a not pathological term for these experiences, that they were being told they were crazy. Some were being put in the mental hospital. Some were being put on medication. Some even had electroshock treatment. They'd been told by their family they're crazy. There'd been divorces because, why do you keep insisting this happened to you? And even churches were saying to people, if they spoke to the minister, oh, this is clearly work of the devil. This is not within our doctrine, whatever. And I was really distressed at how harm was being done to everybody who's having these experiences just because they're so misunderstood and labeled incorrectly, pathologized. And then, but it didn't feel safe to me for many years to come out publicly. So I continued leading this sort of in the closet life. And then in 1990, that all changed. I had traveled to a conference in California that I'd been invited to speak about Kundalini, Kundalini awakening, because one of the things that happened along the way by divine design, I was guided by spirit in 1977 to travel to India. I was so clearly guided by spirit to travel to India to meet Gopi Krishna. And Gopi Krishna is a person who had a spontaneous Kundalini awakening and had a lot of difficulty for many years. So one would now call it spiritual emergency for like 12 years until his process stabilized. And then he actually reached a stabilized, expanded state of consciousness. He was not a guru. He didn't take disciples, but he wrote 17 books on Kundalini awakening. And he thought it really important that the West and the whole world become aware of Kundalini awakening because more and more people are going to be having it. And not only that, he thought that near-death experiences could also stimulate a Kundalini awakening. And remember, I told you how my near-death experience had many features that were similar to my Kundalini awakening, that roaring sound, the going out of body. But after my near-death experience, my Kundalini symptoms increased too. So I was getting more rushes of energy up my spine. I was getting more inner sounds. I was getting more chakra sensations. So yeah, I was experiencing that they were connected. Anyway, I was known to be an expert on Kundalini because Gopi Krishna had become a mentor to me, and I'd read all of his books. So I'd been invited to speak to this conference in 1990, put on by the Spiritual Emergence Network and the Institute for Transpersonal Psychology. And it was in Monterey, California. And the woman who invited me, Dr. Bonnie Greenwell, she suggested that we offer to have a sharing circle if there happened to be any people that are experiencers that were there at the conference, not just doctors and professionals, but experiencers. So we held our first experiencer sharing circle. Bonnie and I each facilitated a group, and all kinds of people showed up. And they were all sharing in the sharing circle. I opened up first by sharing my own experiences. And then it meant so much to these people. Many people were crying and hugging me afterwards and crying. It meant so much to them to have a medical doctor, someone with an MD after their name, to validate what happened to them and to say that it wasn't crazy. And I was so moved by this experience, incredibly moved. It was like my heart got cracked open. And I went for a walk afterwards on the sand dunes. This place was located on the sand dunes on the Pacific Ocean. I was walking through the sand dunes park, and all of a sudden I had this profound, what I call my calling mystical experience. And what happened was, all of a sudden, where my head used to be, it's like it cracked open, and where my head used to be became a sun, radiating light in all directions. And in this, shall we say, illumined state, I knew there were no words spoken. It was just, I knew that I was being called, to come out of the closet. And I was being called to be an advocate for experiencers, to share what I had learned those 12 years that I'd been in the closet. And when I got back from California, back to, I had a teaching position at the University of Toronto, I went to my department chairman. I told him, I'll resign if you want, but I'm going to now specialize in counseling and researching people who've had all sorts of spiritual experiences, including near-death experiences. And through the grace of God, I think my guardian angels overshadowed my department chairman, because he said, "Oh, you don't have to resign, Yvonne. As long as you're doing research, that's fine with me." And he says, and it all started with that plane crash that we sent you on that plane. And I said, "Yes, you did." And so that's when, back in the 90s, I started specializing my medical practice, started talking about all these types of experiences, and later on started writing books and coined that phrase, spiritually transformative experiences.
Amazing. Yeah, beautiful. And I'm so proud to know you.
Thank you.
I've learned so much just in this conversation.
Overwhelming, powerful impact on me, or after effect is the word we now use, was the spiritual one. I mean, it was just, I completely lost my fear of death, because death is a joke. We don't die. We just continue on the other side. And I completely expanded my spiritual understanding and my spiritual compassion and my spiritual tolerance, because I became much less judgmental, and much more tolerant, because I got it. We're all children of the same one higher power. We're all trying to understand the same one reality, but it's like climbing a mountain from different perspectives. If you start at a different starting point at the bottom, it looks like you're on a different path, or you're going somewhere different. But once you get to the top, it's like, oh, we're all trying to get to the same point. And that's like what all the spiritual paths were doing. And I really understood it. And I knew that, and I just got it, that in God, the higher power, Brahman, Allah, you can call it whatever you want. That's okay. Higher power gets it. We all know he gets what we mean. He, she gets what we mean. That understands that and embraces that and loves that. And it's only us human egos that put in that judgment that this is wrong, this is right, this is bad, this is bleh, it was so transformative to me in such a positive way. And that was what I was sharing with people, that the incredible love that I felt, that the higher power is real. It's not just what's in books. Like the books are talking about it because it's real. I've experienced it. And so that was much more what I was talking to them about, rather than say the out of body and, verification of what I saw when I was out of body, which in my earlier near-death experiences, because they were out of body type of near-death experiences, that's where they ended, my childhood ones. But that became very important, that what I saw out of body was verified, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas in this one, it was like, yeah, okay, I saw what happened, but wow, this is what's really amazing. The light is what was really amazing.
And did they show intrigue when you were going on passionately about this kind of stuff with them, or how did that conversation really go?
Back in that day, so you have to remember, this was 1979.
Yeah, pre-YouTube.
Yeah, pre-YouTube, and before Daniel Brinkley and Betty Eadie wrote their books on near-death experiences. That didn't happen until the 90s. Near-death experiences did not come into public knowledge, like into the mainstream, until the 90s. And I attribute that very much to both Daniel Brinkley and Betty Eadie's groundbreaking books. And they were really picked up, and they were on like every talk show you can imagine. And I think that, made into movies and all this sort of stuff, that the public became aware of near-death experiences through that. And so what was interesting is what happened to me after I specialized my practice is that during the 90s, at first it was, okay, Yvonne's into this weird thing because of her experience, but within the medical profession, because they're people too, they were hearing about near-death experiences because it was on mainstream media. It wasn't in the medical curriculum. It was in mainstream media. So various universities and programs said, well, gee, we as doctors should learn something about this. Do we have any doctors in Canada who know anything about it? And we're like, hello. So I started getting invited to speak at medical events, at universities and medical conferences about near-death experiences and other spiritually transformative experiences, and relating to medicine. Another common spiritually transformative experience is the end-of-life experience. The spiritual experience that people often have shortly before they die, and also what I call deathbed or death watch experiences, which are the experiences that happen to family members or healthcare providers who are around somebody who dies. So that and the near-death experience, those were ones that really medical professionals could relate with, because they're dealing with death. That's one of the things we deal with. And so I was often invited to speak on those particular topics, and I would try to sneak in a little bit, there's also mystical experiences, there's also Kundalini awakening, just so they'd be aware. So I was very delighted to be blessed with the gift in this lifetime of being able to raise awareness both in the public and to the medical profession. Did tons of talk shows and all that sort of stuff back then. But then in 2003, I had a very serious accident, a slip and fall accident that happened in Niagara Falls, Ontario. And I fell and I hit my head. I fell on black ice, hit my head on rock, had a brain hemorrhage and serious traumatic brain injury, and I died. And that is when I had my most recent near-death experience, was November the 8th, 2003. And I'll just go afterwards, and then I'm going to tell you this story. And it disabled me as a medical doctor. So I had to let go of everything I did before. And that's why there's this like gap in my life of 12 years of, oh, what happened to you? Like, why didn't I hear about you in those 12 years? Well, it's because I was disabled by traumatic brain injury. And I really thought that that part of my life was finished, that it was a chapter that was closed. I'd already written a couple books on STEs, and I thought, well, okay, I guess that's it, that the divine design. So let me tell you what happened. Then I had a healing. We'll get to that afterwards. But first, we'll go to what happened November the 8th, 2003, because this was by far my most powerful near-death experience. What happened that day is I had gone to Niagara Falls. I go there regularly. It's about a 2-hour drive from my home in Toronto. I love going there. It's a power place. I love meditating at the base of the falls because they have little platforms there and tunnels, and there's this loud roar from the waterfalls. And I found that the roar and the vibration, it's like that inner roar and that inner vibration. And I can go very deep, very quickly when I meditate there. So I was standing by the railing, the platform there, meditating at the base of the falls. That's down at the bottom. And I went into a deep, 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 deep state of mystical communion. I reached that state of oneness. And I could see the other side, the white light realm, and this side at the same time. And, I was home again, but eyes wide open while I'm fully conscious. And I saw a being of light, a saint from my particular spiritual tradition. It was Mahavatar Babaji. I saw him appear in a body of light, and he telepathically said to me, "Welcome home." And I just felt my spiritual searching, seeking, striving had now finally succeeded, and I'd found my way home. I mean, that is all of our goal, to be in that state when we're of oneness. Little did I know I was about to die 2 hours later. I remained in that state of oneness until I slipped on the ice and hit my head and died. And I now wonder, was that glorious 2 hours my deathbed experience? What people have before they die? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
Or was it that my karmic time to show me, yes, it is possible, Yvonne, you're going to finally have success before you die? I don't know, maybe both.
I think I agree with you. It was more like a deathbed experience. I don't know if you know, I'm actually a part-time end-of-life doula.
No, I didn't know that. Well, so I'm saying,
ago.
But the interesting thing, I had no idea I was about to die, but I was in that state of communion when I died. So the transition was incredibly easy, right?
And
it's like,
I'm sure even more profound, I bet. Wow.
And so what happened, I slipped on black ice. Nothing broke my fall. I hit my head on the rock pavement and brain hemorrhage, instantly died. And whoosh, a force greater than myself whisked me out of my body. I found myself suddenly rushing, like, speed of light, really quickly upwards through a dark expanse of space. Some people might call it a tunnel. For me, it was like a dark expanse of space. And suddenly I found myself approaching. It was literally like there's a doorway, an entranceway to the realm of light, and the light was radiating from this entranceway. And there at the entranceway, welcoming me, were two beings of light that I instantly recognized. One was Mahavatar Babaji, who had said, "Welcome home." And together with him was Paramahansa Yogananda in their light bodies. And then all of a sudden I'm in the light, and the saints, they're saints from my particular spiritual tradition. Self-realization fellowship is the path that I follow. And they telepathically instantly communicated to me so that I would understand that my physical body had died, that my work in the incarnation of Dr. Yvonne Cason was finished. And the feeling was incredible joy, of celebration, of welcome. It was like a graduation party, seeing how you made it, you finished that assignment or whatever. And that's how it felt. And like there were other beings of light there in the light. It felt like there were all kinds of souls that loved me, but I didn't like make out faces or personalities of the other beings of light. But then all of a sudden what happened was so interesting. It was like, I guess my ego mind was still there somewhere. It's like this little voice on my shoulder spoke up and went, uh-oh, here comes the life review. Because, I'd learned so much and spoken to so many people with near-death experiences. I know when people actually die, that they often will get a life review. And I mean, I've tried to live a good life, but I'm not perfect. I've certainly made mistakes. And so there was this little part of me, like the little devil on my shoulder, that was worried about, uh-oh, here comes the life review. And what was so incredible is what happened. It's like the two beings of light, the two saints, they could read my mind. Like they knew exactly what my worry was. And so one of them looked over at me and just glanced at me. And like with the glance, there was this incredible spiritual transmission and understanding. And the understanding that was transmitted to me just in an instant, it's like blowing a fleck of dust off the shoulder and the little devil was gone. But the understanding that was transmitted to me was, don't worry about it. The divine understands. And with that came the understanding that just like a loving parent, when your child is learning how to walk, your kid's going to fall, make mistakes, skin its knees, bump its head, it might break something, that's all part of a kid growing up. But as a loving parent, you don't punish the child for that. You embrace them and you encourage them and you love them and you say, don't worry, honey, you can try again. You'll do better next time. And that was the kind of love that I was being welcomed with. Don't worry about it. Yeah, you can do better next time. I'll try and do better next time. And so it was just such complete unconditional love. And then I sort of shifted into a different state. It's hard to have words to describe what it's like on the other side, but I was sort of in a state of consciousness where I was no longer visually seeing things, but it was like my brain's capacity to absorb knowledge had vastly improved. Like I'd turned from a Pentium 5 into a huge mega computer or something in my consciousness, and I could just absorb vast amounts of information and memory and knowledge all at once. And suddenly I remembered, because that's what it felt like, that I used to know, but I'd forgotten. I remembered all of my past lives. And when that happened, it was like an aha moment, because aha, suddenly my rather unusual life as Dr. Yvonne Cason made complete sense. Because I realized and remembered that my soul has had near-death experiences in many incarnations. My soul has had Kundalini awakening in many incarnations. My soul has had mystical experiences in many incarnations. And that from a soul level, my soul was just sort of continuing on being what it's been like for many incarnations. Just on an ego level, when I was incarnated in the form, I didn't know that. I didn't remember that. And that was why it seemed a bit weird that I was having all of these experiences. And so it was an incredibly beautiful moment, this aha moment, because finally I fit in my skin. And while I was in this state, there was also this very clear perception, which is very, very difficult to describe, about time, and about that time does not pass the same on the other side as it does down here. And it was just very, very clear that time could loop, time could bend, that what seems like a long time on the other side could only be a second here, or vice versa. A second here could be a long time down there. It's like that time just passed completely differently. And also there was this sense like that past, present, and future, what we down here perceive as past, present, and future, they all coexist on the other side. And that it was just a matter of where I focused my attention. If I focused over here, past department, I would be perceiving what we here on Earth see as the past. If I was focusing here, I would see what we here on earth see as the present, or if I was focusing there, I would see what we here on earth perceive as the future or possible futures. Anyway, I basked in bliss, in ecstasy, communion for timeless time. It seemed like a much longer time passed up there than down here, until suddenly the two beings of light reappeared to me, Paramahansa Yogananda and Mahavatar Babaji, and they telepathically communicated to me. They said, you may now choose to either incarnate in the body of a baby or to go back to the injured form. Actually, they said and or to go back to the injured body of Dr. Yvonne Cason. And I remember it's like my heart and soul were just wide open. I was just in a complete state of love, bliss, surrender, trust, knowing of the wisdom of the divine plan. And instantly it was my heart that responded. It was not my little, the devil on my shoulder. It was my heart that responded. My heart and soul instantly responded. Oh, masters, please guide me. What is the higher choice? I want to do God's will. And so lovingly and so sweetly, like how a thought can have that amount of sweetness and love, like it's hard to convey, but with exquisite sweetness and love, they telepathically communicated to me, it will be more difficult, but to return to the injured body. And immediately, no questions asked, my heart and soul said, I accept. And boom, it was so fast. It was between the I and the accept that with a gasp of air, I found myself lying on the ground there in Niagara Falls, waking up in my dead or unconscious body and starting to breathe life back into it. And for the first few minutes, I could see both realms perfectly clearly. It was like the white light realm was completely superimposed on the physical realm. It's like a double exposure photo where you can see both realms completely clearly. And the two beings of light, they were right there with me. It was like they just, whoo, they were with me as I was put back in my body. And then what happened is I was breathing life back into my physical body, which, by the way, felt like waking up into an ice cube, because I guess your body loses body temperature when you're dead outside in winter in Canada. So, I was breathing air into my body. And then slowly with time, the two beings of light and the white light realm, they sort of faded from view until it became just a little dot in my consciousness. And that dot, that's still open, has remained there ever since and has been like a life ring for me in the really, really difficult times that came afterwards. Because as I mentioned before, I was completely disabled after this brain injury, couldn't practice medicine anymore, couldn't write books anymore, couldn't public speak anymore. I had difficulty having a shower in the morning. Like that's the level of challenges that I was having. And I remained disabled for 12 years until the miracle healing I had in 2016. But I'm going to pause here in case you want to ask me some questions about this.
I'm so grateful that you've shared all this with us. And I have to say also, as a compliment to you, that's probably out of the hundreds that I've interviewed, I've never heard like someone describe so cleverly and beautifully that unconditional love like you did. That was bang on. I really have to say, I hope you have that written down somewhere, or it goes into your next book. It was beautiful. It's so, I mean, I understand what that is, but for somebody hearing that for the first time, the way you described it, they're just gonna get it. It was perfect.
I'm glad it conveyed the concept.
Oh, it certainly did. How has it, like the perception of NDEs when people are having these experiences, is there anything, have you seen any change in the responses from doctors and nursing staff, for example?
Yes, I definitely have. I think that, and the general public on every level, I think that over the last 30 years, there's been a dramatic increase in awareness about near-death experiences, which is great because it not only helps those people who've had them, but it also is opening the door to realizing there are other types of spiritual experiences that people are having that are also need to be recognized, understood, and not pathologized. But I think, and the interesting thing is how it's come about. This raising awareness did not come out through medical school curriculums. It came out through the public media and YouTube and television and movies and books.
People like yourself, of course.
Yeah, and people like myself talking, but the general society awareness, including medical professionals, nurses, social workers, etc., I think has dramatically increased about near-death experiences. I also think, I'm glad to hear that you're a death doula. That's wonderful. That the awareness about end-of-life experiences is also increasing. And I think that's really, really, really important. Like, I think it's important, too, that people realize that this is a very sacred time, end of life, very, very sacred time. And
some beautiful, as you mentioned, experiences can ensue when you're going through that kind of thing. And the awareness just makes it that much more beautiful, especially if others around you can either give you the space or share it with you, Yeah, I think it's amazing. What advice would you have for viewers who may have recently gone through a spiritually transformative experience and just don't know what to do with themselves? And I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. What advice would you give them?
I sure do. Well, I give them two things. One is the network, the international online network that I'm leading called Spiritual Awakenings International. I'm the president and co-founder of that. Our website is www.spiritualawakeningsinternational.org, where we have a shorter one that's called spiritualconference.org. That's because we have a great spiritual conference every year. And you can find a lot of information on our website about all the different kinds of STEs that is helpful to many people, because I know many people have told me they're reading through this, go, oh, I've had that. I didn't know there was a name for that. Oh, I've had that. That's what that's called. Oh, I've had that one too. But it's helpful just to discover the names for the experiences that you have. And then you can look them up. You can Google them. Now you have the name to call it. And you can find different people who've had them. And the other thing is I recommend this book, Touched by the Light, which is the book I wrote, Exploring Spiritually Transformative Experiences. And this is based on my 40 years of counseling people who've had all sorts of STEs. And so I've got there's 100 case stories in here of different people having different kinds of STEs, and including some of my stories that a lot of people have told me that was really, really helpful to them. I also include a lot of tips in terms of how to help you integrate and how to help you ground. And what if you're having trouble with grounding, which is often what people's problem is. One is problem often is just even finding a name to call your experience. Another problem is grounding, because people find that they're going out of body all the time. They're having trouble functioning at work. They're feeling very ungrounded. So I have a lot of tips for grounding here. And
That's
then
wonderful.
The other thing that happens is that I think it's important to mention that after a spiritual awakening or STE of any kind, what tends to surface, I look at it as a light being shone in our inner house. And so little dark cobwebs in the corners, all of a sudden the light's on them. And so they come into your awareness. So things that may be childhood issues or family issues or past life issues that have not been dealt with yet, all of a sudden start rising into your consciousness after you've had a spiritual awakening. So I talk about that a lot in my book. And that's perfectly normal. And sometimes you can deal with it on your own. Sometimes you feel, I think I'll go see a therapist. That's good. Do that. So these are some of the things. And the last thing I wanted to mention is at Spiritual Awakenings International, we have speaking events where we have speakers sharing their experiences. But we also have sharing circles. So they're confidential online sharing circles. We hold them the first Saturday of each month. So if somebody wanted to come to one of our sharing circles, that's a safe, confidential
amazing. I've been to
place.
one of them. They're fantastic. Yeah, I highly recommend.
Where you can share your experiences. Yeah. Okay. So those are my suggestions, John.
That's great. Yeah, you've done some amazing work, and thank you so much. I'm really glad that we added that to this because I will definitely link to these things in the
Thank
description
you.
box for sure.
So people might wonder, well, you were disabled with traumatic brain injury, but now you're the president of a nonprofit that you founded and you're leading sharing circles and you're writing books. What happened in between? Did something change? Yes, something changed, obviously. For 12 years, I tried to heal from my traumatic brain injury. Sorry, I need a sip here. Eventually, with time, I had to accept that for whatever reason in the divine plan, I was now disabled. I was not able to work anymore, do the things I used to do before. And I thought, well, the way I can serve humanity now as a disabled person was through my prayers and meditation. So I took my prayer and meditation life very, very seriously. It took me years to regain my ability to meditate. So I put a lot of time and energy into years, like maybe 8 to 9 years to get back my ability to meditate. That's what I'm talking about. Years took a long time. They tell me that that's neuroplasticity, the ability of your brain to heal. But they used to say that after a neurological injury, like a traumatic brain injury, that the healing stops after about 2 years. So I'm a testimonial. That is not true because my healing happened 12 years later. It was over 12 years later. It was February 24th, 2016. I remember the day. I have it in my memory. I was sitting meditating in the SRF meditation retreat in Encinitas, California, which is a holy place. And that spiritual vibration is still there. And I'm very sensitive. I'm an empath. I'm very sensitive to vibrations. So meditating in holy places is something I love to do because it helps me go very, very deep. I was meditating there. And I was deep into meditation. And all of a sudden, inwardly, I could see this like an eruption, like a volcano of liquid light erupting in the center of my brain and flowing and illuminating the center of my brain. And and with that came the subjective feeling of waking up. It was like the center part of my brain had been asleep for 12 years and it suddenly woke up. And literally the lights got turned on. Like, there was brilliant light in the center of my brain and waking up. And my brain was healed. My brain was healed. My brain injury was healed. And what happened then, it was like a floodgate opened because I'd been sort of in a locked in state that my intelligence and memory had not been affected, but I had other cognitive issues that made it difficult for me I couldn't write my books, I couldn't do public speaking. But now what happened was that let's go floodgate open and all this stuff that had been bottled inside of me for all these years wanted to come pouring out. I mean, the creativity I went into was incredible. I wrote the first draft of these 2 books in the first 9 months. And I like that because 9 months is how long a pregnancy is. It's like I was giving birth to 2 babies. And, then afterwards, of course, we have to do editing and get them published, blah, blah, blah. But the message I was given was pass on what you have learned. It's been a profound brain healing, a profound and complete brain healing. And, I'm doing my best to pass on what I have learned and to be a support and encouragement for other people who are having spiritual awakenings of all kinds. Never give up hope. There is always hope for a miracle. Miracles do happen. I am a living example that miracles do happen. So with God, all things are possible. Never give up hope. That is the message I'd like to leave people with.
Oh, thank you so very much for that. That's awesome. Thank you for everything that you do. It's been such a joy. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. God bless.
Well, thank you, John. It's been great meeting you, and God bless you too.
Bye.